From lit up neoclassical looking Skopje, Macedonia, this is Josh Friedman concluding a trip around the former Yugoslavia. I started out, I forget how long ago, I think about a week and a half ago in Slovenia. I made my way briefly through Croatia, stopping for a night in the capital Zagreb. I then covered the election, the complicated election in Bosnia. I spent a night and spent about a day actually in Belgrade in Serbia before making my way down into Kosovo for a few days or so. And I've spent the past couple days here in Skopje, and over the course of this trip I've hit 6, or I should say 5 of the 6 former Yugoslav republics plus Kosovo. The only republic I missed on this trip was Montenegro, which I did pay a visit to earlier this year, and I have visited several times over the past few years. Anyway, on this trip, we have discussed some of the major conflicts and disputes that still plague this region a couple decades or so after the war and after the collapse of Yugoslavia, one of which involves a country that was not in Yugoslavia, that being Greece, which remains engaged in a dispute with this very country, which for now is still called Macedonia, and that dispute is being hashed out, or possibly being hashed out, in the Macedonian parliament on that side of the river where I reported to you from earlier today. It appears that there's going to be a debate on the matter for several days. They could debate it for up to 10 days before having the first vote on the issue, which I was discussing earlier today, so I'm not going to be staying put and waiting that out. Maybe the vote is as soon as tomorrow, but that seems a bit unlikely to me. It, like I said, could be a day from now, or it could be 9 days from now when the Macedonian parliament has its first vote on whether or not they want to move forward with changing the constitution to change the name of the country to North Macedonia. And if that vote fails, then in all likelihood there will be snap elections. I discuss this Macedonian name dispute issue at a time in which a lot of people are viewing it as a test case for whether the conflicts and disputes in this region as a whole can get resolved. And I would say thus far, this test is not looking so successful. There is still time, and there could be many twists and turns remaining, and maybe indeed the Macedonian name dispute gets resolved soon. And the EU is saying now is the time, and that's largely because there's currently an overtly pro-EU, pro-Western government here in Skopje, and the government in Greece at the moment is very much cooperating. And it could change in the other direction, both here and in Athens, in a hurry. But anyway, whether or not this dispute gets resolved in a timely manner might very well reflect on, or give us a gauge for, whether the Serbia-Kosovo dispute will get resolved in a timely manner, and whether other major issues in the region, such as can Bosnia function as a country, at least can it function as a country under its current setup, as well as other lesser issues that are going to have to be hashed out in order for this region to be integrated into the EU and NATO, in large part. Serbia, at least at the moment, has no interest in joining NATO, but the rest of the countries, at least to some degree, do have interest in joining NATO, and they're all trying to join the EU. Well, following the referendum last month, which a lot of people say was a failure in an attempt to resolve this issue here, Serbian President Alexander Vučić was saying something along the lines of, look what happens when the West or foreign powers meddle in the affairs of the Western Balkans or small states here in the Balkans, and that maybe these states should handle these issues on their own. And I'm not going to say whether or not I agree or disagree with his sentiments, but a lot of people are looking at, well, you've got a couple pro-Western, pro-EU and NATO governments here, and they're struggling to resolve their differences. What's going to happen when you try to resolve the Serbia-Kosovo conflict, when the government, for instance, in Belgrade is not quite as keen as going along with all of the demands of Brussels that the government here in Skopje is? And people were also, some of whom probably lie on the other side of the fence, were saying, well, you have a similar issue with, say Vučić calls a referendum in Serbia on some sort of deal that he strikes with Kosovo on normalizing ties. Would 50% of the population or 50% of the voters show up to vote in that referendum? Only 37% showed up here, and Serbia as a whole tends to be overwhelmingly opposed, at least in current sentiments, to giving any sort of recognition to the independence of Kosovo. And simultaneously, as I've discussed, or I shouldn't say simultaneously, but as I discussed last week in Bosnia, it's almost as if Bosnia is the forgotten child here in the Western Balkans, and its issues are even more complex, arguably, and Bosnia is nowhere near even getting to the point where we're talking about a deal being struck to get it into the EU and NATO. So, looking at this test case that is the Macedonia-Greece name deal, there's a lot of reason to be skeptical that these issues in the region are going to get resolved, and that the region as a whole will get integrated into Western institutions, at least in the near future, as is planned in some cases. But on the other hand, I would have to say that, having made my rounds over the past couple weeks, I do see some signs of hope, or signs for hope, not just for integrating these countries into the EU and NATO, which for me it's kind of inconsequential. I mean, I don't really have a dog in that fight, but just some signs for hope in general. One being, it seems to me that largely across the region, but it's very noticeable in some places, people are getting tired of fighting with one another. It seems like there's some fatigue. People have just had enough of all the ethnic bickering. Now, that's certainly not the case with everyone, but I'm starting to see some fatigue in places like Bosnia and Mitrovica, Kosovo. It was very interesting to see how in Bosnia there were Serbs and Muslims, or Bosniaks, and I guess some Croats too, who were uniting over the issues of the couple alleged murder cover-ups, one being in Banja Luka and one being in Sarajevo. And people were putting aside the ethnic differences to come together in what was amounting to a protest movement against corruption and abuse of power. And when I was in Mitrovica, Kosovo, where, granted, there, as I said, tensions diffuse at times, but tensions also continue to spike at times. But it seemed like, especially seeing the one protest on the Serb side, where most people didn't really seem to want to be protesting. They were just, most of them seemed to just be hanging out. They might have been pressured to showing up, and they're just standing and chatting as the protest about the Association of Serb Municipalities was carrying on. Anyway, it seemed like a lot of those people are kind of tired of having to constantly scream about what the Albanians are up to and how they're getting a raw deal. So I do think after war, and then after another decade or two of constant infighting among groups within countries and within the Balkans as a whole, I think some people are just getting tired of it all. And then I'd also say, taking a look at the youth across the region, particularly I was thinking about that today as I visited this protest camp here in Skopje. And every time I go there, it's a bunch of old people. Granted, there certainly are young Macedonians who are keen on preserving the Macedonian identity and nationality and who don't support the name deal, but there weren't young people hanging out at this protest camp. Not when I was back over the summer, and not since I've been back in town over the past couple days. And I think that's kind of representative of what I see in the region as a whole. A lot of young people seem to have an attitude, something along the lines of just whatever it takes to improve our economic prospects, to get us some jobs, to get us some higher wages, to allow us to live with some more dignity. That seems to be a common sentiment among youth across the region. And that sentiment was expressed to me when I was conducting interviews here a couple months back, asking young people, do they support the name deal? And a lot of them were saying, yeah, not because they're keen on renaming their country North Macedonia, but because they just want, I mean, they're willing to take a chance on whatever it takes to improve their economic prospects. So I think those are several signs for hope for the region. But at the same time, I would come back to something that will keep me skeptical, which is, having witnessed it very recently in Bosnia and having covered several elections here over the past several years, it seems like there are entrenched politicians and parties in the region who are very keen on maintaining the status quo. In some cases, that means constantly playing the nationalist card, constantly turning to nationalist politics and ethnic divisions to stay in power, as kind of seems to be the case both with Bosnia and the Serbia-Kosovo issues that I've been taking a look at over the past week, but elsewhere in the region too. Anyway, these entrenched politicians and parties make me question whether there's the political will, both coming from the voters and coming from the politicians, to get these disputes and conflicts resolved. It seems as though there's the political will here at the moment. at least from the government in Macedonia and the government in Greece, but based on the turnout in last month's referendum, I don't know if there is the political will from the country as a whole to get this issue resolved. And if this is the test case, then I wouldn't say as a whole in the Balkans right now that it seems as though there's a political will to resolve all of these different conflicts and disputes. So I would say that there's hope for the region, not just for its Western integration, but for its economic prospects and for some prosperity in the future. But at the same time, I would say that it remains very much up in the air whether there is the will to resolve the many conflicts that remain here in the Western Balkans and in the former Yugoslavia. Nonetheless, I'm very grateful for having made this trip around the former Yugoslavia. I love this region, and I think I'm going to keep coming back here for years to come, although I might not be spending a whole lot of time here in the coming months. Nonetheless, I'm very grateful for having embarked on this trip, and I'm grateful for you to have joined me in this venture. So one last time on this trip, I will say thank you very much, and ciao.